It started on an unusually warm Saturday morning, the kind of day where the sunlight filters through the blinds like golden ribbons, making everything in the living room look softer than it really is. I had just brewed a pot of coffee and sat down at the table near the window that overlooked the quiet cul-de-sac. Birds were chirping, neighbors were mowing their lawns, and life in the suburbs seemed, at least on the surface, perfectly ordinary. But ordinary was something I hadn't experienced in years. You see, I wasn't just any resident. I was Detective Sarah Mitchell of the State Police. Off duty at that moment, yes, but the badge tucked neatly into my wallet and the gun secured in the lockbox by the door never let me forget who I was. After years in undercover narcotics and now homicide, I had seen far too much to ever relax fully. I had moved into this neighborhood to escape the chaos of the city, to rebuild some sense of peace after endless stakeouts, midnight raids, and too many funerals of colleagues who hadn't made it home. What I hadn't anticipated was that suburban warfare could come in a very different form, not drug lords or street gangs, but one woman. A woman who made it her life's mission to control everyone around her. Karen, with her sharp blonde bob, oversized sunglasses even when it was cloudy, and her ever-present clipboard. Karen, who believed she was the sheriff, the judge, and the executioner of our neighborhood. Karen, who wasn't even the official president of the HOA, but acted like she had been sworn in at the White House. From the first day I moved into my modest two-story brick home, Karen had appointed herself my uninvited welcoming committee. She arrived with a plastic smile stretched so tight across her face I thought it might crack, and a list of community expectations. She rattled them off like commandments from on high. No trash cans visible, no vehicles parked on the street overnight, no grass higher than 2 inches, and for the love of God, no porch furniture that wasn't tastefully neutral. I had listened politely, thanked her for her guidance, and then gone about my life. But Karen wasn't the kind of person you could ignore. She thrived on control, on confrontation, and on weaving herself into the lives of others like a vine that strangled its host tree. The first conflict came over my truck. IT was a black Ford F-150, dusty from weekend camping trips and proudly displaying my old police academy sticker on the bumper. I parked it in front of my house one night after coming back late, too tired to back it into the driveway. By morning, there was a bright pink sticky note on the windshield in sharp, aggressive handwriting. I had crumpled the note, tossed it into the trash, and moved on. But Karen didn't move on. That pink sticky note was the beginning of a quiet war. Over the next few months, she escalated, photographing my lawn if it grew a little long before mowing day, scolding me for leaving my recycling bins out a few hours too long, even knocking on my door once to lecture me about the unsightly boots I had left drying on my porch after a muddy hiking trip. I had kept my cool, reminding myself that this was the life I had chosen: suburbia, safety, peace. Karen was just noise. Until the morning she decided I didn't belong in my own house. I was sweeping the porch when I saw her marching down the sidewalk, visor tilted forward like a general heading into battle, little white sneakers squeaking with each determined step. She had her phone in one hand and the clipboard in the other, her mouth already pursed into that familiar scowl. "Sarah," she began, without so much as a hello. "We need to talk." I set the broom aside and leaned against the railing, already bracing myself. "What is it this time, Karen?" Her eyes flicked over me like I was a criminal she'd caught red-handed. "I've had several complaints from the neighborhood watch. People are concerned. You've been having unusual visitors late at night. Cars pulling up, leaving after only a few minutes. It looks suspicious." I almost laughed out loud. The unusual visitors were my colleagues, dropping off case files or grabbing a late-night coffee with me when I couldn't sleep. But to Karen, everything was a scandal. "Karen," I said calmly, "I work in law enforcement.
My colleagues sometimes stop by.
Nothing illegal is happening here." She sniffed, unconvinced. "Law enforcement? I've never seen a badge. All I see is a single woman, with strange men coming and going. This is a family neighborhood, and frankly, you're lowering the tone." The jab landed harder than I expected. Lowering the tone. That was Karen's favorite weapon. The suggestion that you weren't good enough, that you didn't belong. I folded my arms. "I pay my mortgage just like you. What happens on my property is none of your business, as long as it's legal." Her nostrils flared. "We'll see about that." And with that, she spun on her heel and stormed away. I thought that was the end of it. But the real storm was still brewing. 2 nights later, around 9 p.m., I was at home reviewing an old case file when I heard the unmistakable sound of tires screeching to a halt outside. Moments later, red and blue lights flashed across my curtains. Confused, I set the file down and went to the door. On my porch stood 2 uniformed officers, hands resting on their belts, faces tight with the seriousness of a call they clearly hadn't expected in this neighborhood. Behind them, in the glow of the patrol car, stood Karen, arms folded, lips stretched into a self-satisfied smirk. "Ma'am," one officer began, "we received a report of a trespasser in this residence. Are you the homeowner?" For a split second, the absurdity of it all hit me like a punch. Karen had actually called 911 on me, claiming I didn't belong in my own house. I pulled my wallet from my pocket, flipped it open, and revealed my badge. The silver gleamed in the porch light. "Detective Sarah Mitchell, State Police." "Yes, officer, I own this house." The younger officer blinked, visibly thrown off. The older one scratched the back of his neck, muttering, "Well, that clears that up." Karen's jaw dropped, her smug expression evaporating into shock. "Wait, what? She's not an officer. She's lying. She's making it up." I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. "Karen, filing a false report to 911 is a crime. You told them I was a trespasser. You tried to weaponize the police against me." Her face turned red, but she stammered, I thought, but I'd had enough. For months, she had harassed me, pushed me, tried to undermine my place here. And now she had escalated it to calling emergency services, wasting resources, and putting me in danger. I pulled my badge fully from my wallet, held it up to the officers, and said the words I never thought I'd have to say in my own neighborhood. "Officers, I am placing this woman under arrest for filing a false police report." The silence was thick enough to choke on. Karen's eyes went wide, her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The younger officer looked to the older one, who nodded slowly. Karen shrieked, "You can't arrest me. I'm the head of the HOA." I looked her dead in the eyes, voice sharp as steel.
"No, Karen.
You're a criminal." Karen's shriek echoed down the street, bouncing off the quiet houses like a siren no one wanted to hear. Curtains twitched, blinds shifted, neighbors peeking out, hungry for drama but too polite or too scared of Karen to step outside. The scene looked almost surreal. 2 uniformed officers frozen in uncertainty, me holding my badge out and Karen flailing her arms like a toddler denied candy. "This is outrageous," she screeched, stomping her white sneakers against the concrete. "You can't arrest me. I know my rights. This is harassment." I kept my voice steady. "Karen, you filed a false 911 report claiming there was a trespasser in this home. You knowingly misled emergency services. That's a crime. The officers here can confirm you were the one who made the call." The younger officer cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we do have the call log. The dispatcher noted your name, Karen Holt." Karen froze for just a second, her eyes darting toward the officers. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "I was protecting the neighborhood. She doesn't belong here. She's a danger. She has men coming and going at all hours. That's enough." My tone sliced through her accusations. "Karen Holt, you are under arrest for filing a false police report and misuse of emergency services." The older officer stepped forward. "Detective Mitchell, would you like us to take her into custody?" I nodded.
"Yes,
"Please." Karen gasped like someone had struck her. "What? You're really going to know? This is my neighborhood. I run this community." The irony wasn't lost on me. A woman who had no real authority outside of her clipboard was now about to feel the cold reality of the law she thought she could bend at will. The younger officer gently but firmly took her wrist, reciting the Miranda rights as he pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click of the cuffs closing around Karen's wrists was louder than the summer cicadas buzzing in the background. She struggled, her voice going shrill. "This is abuse. I'll have your jobs. Do you know who I am? I'm the head of the HOA." The older officer muttered dryly, "Pretty sure that's not an elected government position, ma'am." Despite the seriousness of the moment, I nearly laughed. Karen kicked her sneakers against the pavement, twisting in their hold, but the officers guided her toward the patrol car. Neighbors' lights flicked on across the street, faces pressed to glass with wide eyes. A few phones recorded from behind curtains. This was the kind of spectacle that would ripple through the community for months, maybe years, as they placed her in the back seat. She shrieked one last time. "Sarah Mitchell, you'll regret this. You'll never be welcome here." The door slammed, cutting her off mid-rant. I exhaled, my heart thudding in my chest. This wasn't how I wanted to spend my evening, but it was necessary. Too many times in my line of work, I had seen what happened when people thought they could manipulate the system for their own gain. Karen wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She had crossed the line into criminal behavior. The younger officer approached me, shifting awkwardly. "Detective, I've got to say, this is a first. Usually these calls are about noise complaints or lost dogs. Never had to arrest the caller before." I gave him a small smile. "Welcome to suburbia. Trust me, it's wilder than it looks." They drove Karen away, her shouts muffled by the closed windows of the squad car. For the first time in months, my street was quiet. No clipboard, no visor, no shrill voice demanding compliance. Just quiet, but quiet never lasts. The fallout began the very next morning that I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the sharp, professional tone on the other end introduced himself as Detective Mitchell. He said smoothly, "I represent Mrs. Karen Holt. She tells me you unlawfully arrested her last night. She's preparing to file a civil suit against you personally and the police department." I pinched the bridge of my nose, already feeling the headache. "Mr. Grant, your client filed a false police report. I acted within the scope of the law. The responding officers witnessed the entire thing. If she wants to pursue this in court, I suggest she prepare for a counterclaim." There was a pause on the other end before the attorney spoke again. "Karen is passionate about her community. She believes she was protecting her neighbors." I almost laughed. Passion doesn't excuse perjury. If she continues down this path, she'll find herself with more than one charge. I hung up before he could respond. That day, the neighborhood buzzed like a hornet's nest kicked over. People whispered in driveways, chatted in hushed tones by mailboxes, and sent speculative texts in group chats. I could feel their eyes on me when I stepped outside, watering my lawn like it was any other day. Some avoided me. Others gave small nods of respect. But one by one, the truth started to seep through the grapevine. Karen had lied, Karen had been arrested, and the woman she tried to evict was actually a detective with a badge. By the afternoon, a knock came at my door. It was Mrs. Henderson from across the street, a kind widow in her 70s who always brought cookies around Christmas. She stood nervously, holding a plate of banana bread. "I just wanted to say," she began, "that I'm so sorry you've had to deal with Karen. She's been difficult for years, but none of us knew how far she'd go. Thank you for standing up to her." I accepted the bread with a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I appreciate that. Hopefully this sends a message." And it did. But not the one Karen wanted. 3 days later, she was released on bail. I was watering my roses when I saw her minivan crawl up the street, headlights off, creeping like a predator stalking its prey. She parked in her driveway, and for the first time, Karen didn't strut or wave her clipboard around. She ducked inside quickly, avoiding every glance from her neighbors. But the war wasn't over. By the end of the week, brightly printed flyers appeared in every mailbox. The title in bold letters screamed, "The flyer accused me of bringing dangerous criminals into the neighborhood, of hiding behind a badge to intimidate families, and of targeting a respected HOA leader, out of spite." Karen had clearly poured every ounce of bitterness into those pages. I held the flyer in my hand and couldn't help but chuckle. The desperation dripped from every line. Instead of making me look bad, she only made herself look unhinged. Still, misinformation spreads like wildfire. I knew better than anyone how rumors could twist reality. So, instead of tearing the flyers up in frustration, I decided to handle it the way I handled every case, with facts, with patience, and with strength. That weekend, I hosted a small barbecue. I invited the neighbors, the Hendersons, the Parkers, the Garcias, even the Johnsons who barely left their house. One by one, they came, curious and cautious. I greeted them with open arms, serving burgers and iced tea, making small talk about gardening and kids' soccer games. Slowly, the tension eased. People began to ask questions about my work, about Karen, about what had really happened. And I answered honestly, by the time the sun dipped below the rooftops, laughter filled my backyard. Kids chased fireflies, adults swapped stories, and for the first time since moving here, I felt like part of the community. Karen's flyers? They went straight into recycling bins. But Karen wasn't done. The following Monday, I returned home from a long day at the precinct to find her standing in my driveway, arms crossed, waiting. Her sunglasses reflected the fading sunset, but I could see the fury etched across her face. "You think you've won," she hissed, stepping closer. "But this isn't over.
You humiliated me.
You turned the neighborhood against me. I will get my revenge." I met her glare without flinching. "Karen, I don't want a war with you. But if you keep crossing the line, you'll leave me no choice but to enforce the law. I suggest you stop while you can." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I don't stop. Ever." And with that, she stormed off into the night. The weeks that followed felt like walking through a minefield. Every time I pulled into my driveway or took the trash bins out, I wondered what new scheme Karen was hatching. She had gone quieter in public, no more waving clipboards or stopping people mid-walk to lecture them, but quiet never meant safe. Quiet was just the calm before another storm. As a detective, I'd learned that some people fight loud with fists and shouting, while others fight quiet, sneaking behind the scenes, pulling strings you don't see until they tighten around your throat. Karen was the latter. The first sign came on a Thursday morning when I left for work. My truck was missing. For a split second, my stomach dropped. Stolen? Then I noticed the small orange slip stuck to the mailbox. My truck had been towed. I marched down to the number listed, and sure enough, there it sat in the impound lot, dusty and roped off. When I asked why, the clerk flipped through his clipboard and shrugged. "Anonymous complaint," said the vehicle was abandoned and a safety hazard. Abandoned? I almost laughed. That truck is worth more than your office. But then it hit me. Anonymous complaint. HOA territory. Karen's fingerprints all over it. I paid the ridiculous fee, drove my truck home, and sat in the cab for a long while, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. She was testing how far she could push me. The second sign came 2 days later. I was in the middle of a grocery run when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my home security system. Motion detected in the backyard. I opened the live feed and froze. Karen. She was in my yard, pacing along the flower beds, snapping photos with her phone like a crime scene investigator. She leaned over, tugged at my garden hose, scribbled something on her clipboard, and muttered to herself. I drove home like a bat out of hell. By the time I pulled into the driveway, she was still there, crouched near the shed, taking pictures of the lock. I stepped out of my truck, voice sharp. Karen, get off my property. She jerked upright, clearly startled, but covered it with that smug mask she always wore.
I'm documenting violations.
Your shed is too close to the fence line. That's against HOA regulations. My blood boiled. This isn't HOA property. It's my yard. You've got 30 seconds to leave before I arrest you for trespassing. Her chin lifted defiantly. You wouldn't dare. I took a step forward, voice low and controlled. Try me. For a moment, we locked eyes. Then, realizing I wasn't bluffing, she huffed and stormed off, muttering threats under her breath. That night, I filed a formal police report, not just as a homeowner, but as a detective. If Karen wanted to play with fire, she was about to get burned. But Karen wasn't finished. The final straw came one muggy Friday evening. I had just come home from a long shift, craving nothing more than a cold shower and some peace. Instead, I found 3 patrol cars lined up in front of my house, and my heart sank as I rushed to the porch where half a dozen officers were milling about, talking to neighbors. One officer I knew well, Officer Daniels, turned as I approached. His face was tight with confusion. Sarah, we got a 911 call. Said there was a hostage situation here. That I stopped cold.
What?
He nodded grimly. Caller claimed they heard screaming, saw someone tied up in the window. SWAT was already en route, but I called them off when I saw it was your address. My chest tightened. A hostage call. Karen had just escalated to the most dangerous form of harassment if Daniels hadn't recognized my name. If SWAT had busted in here with rifles drawn, I could have been killed in my own living room. I clenched my fists. Who placed the call? He grimaced. blocked number. But the voice sounded female. Middle-aged. We didn't say it out loud, but we both knew that I looked around. Sure enough, at the end of the street, behind her living room curtains, I caught a sliver of movement. Karen, peeking out, watching the chaos she had orchestrated. That was it. The line wasn't just crossed, it was obliterated. I pulled out my phone and called the prosecutor's office directly. This is Detective Sarah Mitchell. I need a warrant for Karen Holt. Charges: filing a false police report, harassment, trespassing, misuse of emergency services, and reckless endangerment. Within 24 hours, we had it. The next evening, I walked up Karen's driveway, not as her neighbor, not as her victim, but as the detective she had underestimated. I was flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She answered the door with her usual scowl, but when she saw me, her face went pale. "You again," she spat. "What do you want now? Another chance to humiliate me?" I held up the paper. "Karen Holt, we have a warrant for your arrest. You're facing multiple charges, including swatting. You're coming with us." For a moment, she was silent. Then she laughed, high-pitched, hysterical. "You can't. You're just my neighbor. This is my neighborhood." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Not anymore." The cuffs clicked around her wrists for the second time. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, phones recording, whispers buzzing like static. This time, there was no sympathy, no doubt. Everyone knew what she had done. As she was led to the patrol car, she shrieked over her shoulder. "You'll regret this, Sarah. I'll destroy you. I'll..." The door slammed shut, silencing her. I watched the car drive away, a strange mix of relief and exhaustion washing over me. For months, Karen had terrorized me, tried to manipulate the system, and nearly got me killed. But now, the system had caught up to her. Justice wasn't always swift, but it always came. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I could breathe. Neighbors slowly approached, hesitant at first, then more confident. One by one, they thanked me. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner, for letting Karen bully them for years. The Hendersons invited me over for pie. The Garcias offered to help fix my fence. The Parkers, who had always kept their distance, finally introduced themselves properly. It wasn't just Karen who was gone. It was the fear she had created. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the stars blink awake. For the first time, the neighborhood was quiet in a way that wasn't suffocating, but peaceful. I thought about the irony of it all. I had moved here to escape the chaos of the city, thinking the suburbs would be boring, safe, uneventful. Instead, I'd found a new kind of battleground, one where the enemy wasn't a gang or a drug lord, but a woman with a clipboard and a god complex. But in the end, justice was justice. Whether in the city or the suburbs, the law didn't play favorites, and neither did I. Karen's arrest didn't mean the war was over. It only meant the battlefield had shifted. The morning after she was taken away in handcuffs, the neighborhood buzzed like a shaken beehive. Word traveled fast, faster than I imagined possible. By noon, people I'd barely exchanged waves with were stopping me at the mailbox or calling across the street with questions. "Is it true she swatted you? They said she broke into your yard." I always knew there was something wrong with her. I kept my answer simple. The courts will sort out. What matters is, we're safe now. Safe. The word felt fragile, like glass in my mouth. Because I knew Karen wasn't done. She never admitted defeat. Not even when the law had her by the throat. 3 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom with polished wood benches and the faint smell of old paper. Karen entered in a stiff suit, wrists free but posture rigid, like she thought if she stood tall enough, people would forget the mugshot plastered across the local news. Her attorney, the same smooth-talking Michael Grant, painted her as a misunderstood leader, a pillar of the community unfairly targeted by a vindictive detective neighbor. She acted in good faith, he argued, voice syrupy. She believed there was danger. She called 911 not to harass, but to protect. Is that not what a good citizen should do? I sat at the prosecution's table, stone-faced, letting the evidence speak. The 911 recordings played. Karen's voice trembled with false panic, describing a man tied up in the window, her tone overly theatrical. The jury shifted uncomfortably, some exchanging skeptical glances. Then came the security footage from my yard. Karen trespassing, snapping photos, tugging at my shed lock. No sound, but her frantic movements told the story. And then the witnesses, neighbors who had lived in fear of her clipboard reign. One by one, they testified about her harassment, her threats, her obsessive control. Even the Hendersons, sweet as they were, recounted the time Karen tried to fine them for leaving holiday lights up too long. When it was my turn, I stood tall, badge gleaming at my side. I recounted the night. She called 911 on me. The swatting attempt, the risk it posed not just to me but to the responding officers and community. Emergency services are not a weapon, I told the jury. She didn't call because she believed there was danger. She called because she wanted power. And power is not a defense in a court of law. Karen's glare burned into me from across the room, but I didn't flinch. The trial stretched on for days, but the verdict came quickly on all counts: filing false reports, trespassing, harassment, misuse of emergency services, reckless endangerment. Karen Holt was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, followed by community service and a restraining order. One that kept her far away from me and my property. As the judge read the sentence, Karen finally cracked. She erupted, shouting at the courtroom, pointing at me with shaking hands. She ruined me. She's the criminal. This is my neighborhood. Bailiffs dragged her out, her shrieks echoing down the hallway, and just like that, Karen's reign ended not with a clipboard, but with handcuffs. And the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed. It was subtle at first. Fewer whispers, fewer suspicious glances. Then came something stronger. Unity. People who had once been isolated by fear of Karen began to open up. We organized block parties, shared tools and recipes, even created a neighborhood watch that wasn't just Karen with a clipboard. A T1 meeting. Mr. Garcia raised a toast. To Sarah, he said proudly, for standing up when the rest of us couldn't. The group cheered, and I felt something I hadn't in years: belonging. Even the kids seemed freer. They played louder, left bikes on lawns without fear of violations, chalked hopscotch onto sidewalks Karen once patrolled. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was ours. One quiet evening, months later, I sat on my porch with a steaming mug of coffee. The roses I'd planted were blooming. The truck sat proudly in the driveway, and the only sounds were laughter from the Henderson grandkids across the street. I thought about everything that had happened. The notes, the trespassing, the false reports, the swatting call that could have ended my life. Karen had underestimated me. She thought a clipboard gave her authority, but in the end, it was my badge, my persistence, and my refusal to be bullied that brought her down. But more than that, it was the community standing together. For too long, Karen had ruled with fear. Now, she was gone, and in her absence, something better grew. I wasn't just a detective anymore. I was a neighbor, a protector, a friend. And for the first time in years, I felt at home.